Hello everyone and welcome to part 3 to What If Deku was Chainsaw Man. If you like this video and like the last video, or want to check out the last video, or want to check out a movie of this part, or anything like that, go check out the rest of my videos. It help out a lot. With that being said, let's just get straight into it. Sports Fest would end and the crowd would clear. Deku would be huddled together with the rest of the cohort, chat amongst each other, before returning to class to end the day. Deku would be seething still, staring at Shinso who felt kinda bad. They would walk back to class and Isaiah would dismiss them for the day. Deku would go home and look in the mirror. Sure, he'd gotten strong, but he just lost. He just lost a little respect for himself before looking determined to grow stronger. He would return to class the next day and Isaiah would bring in files of paper for each student. The top writing in big bold letters was internships. Deku's eyes widened as he reads through the names he had gotten. Genuinely, his list wasn't bad at all, but one name stuck out to him the most: Mirko. He grinned and immediately scrapped the rest of the papers, not even needing to read them. He brings the slip to the front of the class for Isaiah to sign, and then goes on his way. Deku would arrive at his regular clothes. Nothing too special. Jeans, a shirt, some J's. He'd rock up and would be greeted by Mirko. She would squint while looking at him, asking why he chose to come here. Deku would immediately reply, instinct. Mirko's frown would turn into a sadistic grin as she lets Deku in. They walk into a large training facility and Mirko gets into her hero outfit. She stares daggers at Deku, asking if he wants to do this. 10th place isn't high enough for her to go full power. Deku would grit his teeth before calling her an idiot and ripping his shirt clean off. Pulling his cord, Mirko would feel the revs through the ground, through her skin. Deku would transform and would rush at Mirko, not holding back a single bit. They would go on and Deku would get pummeled into a wall by Mirko after she let loose a little bit too much. She would stop immediately to rush to Deku's side, a cut on her forehead leaking some blood into Deku's mouth. His arm starts moving, and his fingers faintly grip his cord before tugging on it weakly. The dying rev would kick up again. Deku would pounce. That was a close one. Mirko would be astounded, Deku completely forgetting to tell her about his quirk. They talk a little bit and actually hit it off. Not like in a weird way, but they both match vibes, you know. They both charge in head into danger, you know. Mirko learning about the full potential of Deku would bring some blood in, using her position as a hero to get some donations. She would smirk, saying she needed a better punching bag anyway. Deku would laugh and pull his cord again. They would fight for 3 days and 3 nights straight, Deku almost dying 23 times before Mirko would force revive him, and they would continue. Deku and Mirko on this timeline would get a massive boost to their strength due to this. Deku would unlock his second set of chainsaws on his arms and would finally get his chainsaws on his legs. He would feel himself losing it a little bit after this though, and would rest for the rest of the day straight, as would Mirko. They would then wake up and would go on patrol. Deku would be on patrol in Hosu. I'm just gonna say Mirko lives in Hosu, like, might as well. Deku would bring some spare bags of blood with him, and Mirko would jump through the city with some Nomus, would fly in and try to grab Deku. Deku would cut himself free from their grasp, being flown above an alleyway. He free falls and looks down to see a familiar hero on the floor in front of him. His eyes would widen as he sees Ida laying on a pool of his own blood, paralyzed, about to get stabbed and killed. Deku would pull his cord. Stain freezes. Deku in his state of fatigue would go into almost autopilot. He would enter his hellish form. His chainsaw cord would wrap around each wrist. His face would grow ghoulish and alien. Deku's mouth would open 180 degrees as he would kill Stain, eating him and erasing the memory of Stain as a person. Now, first, Ida was knocked out, so as was Deku, so neither of them remember this power. Mirko would see a glimpse of it, but would understand what happened due to Stain not existing. So, like, she wouldn't really remember it. So pretty much Stain got reality wiped. Like, this does have a knock-on effect. Toga and most of the league's main force wasn't joined due to this. We're getting Stain through Forgetting Stain, though I'm going to say Darby still joins due to his personal vendetta, so the League of Villains is much weaker in this version, not being able to exploit Stain's capture or messages for themselves. All for One, though, would remember Stain's death. Final exams. Class returns and no one remembers Stain, even Ida. People forgetting about how Ida's brother got hurt, summing up to some accident. Deku would find this strange, but once again would not really look into it. He'd walk into class, Aizawa already at the front of the class. Deku would scurry to his seat as Aizawa would speak. As you probably already know, the final exams is coming up this week. We're giving you the week off to study and train. There's 2 portions like the entrance exam. Good luck. This was news to Deku. He would stare agape at Aizawa. He didn't even know they had finals. Deku would use his week off to try and study. Not being able to, he would train. The voice in his head would get louder. Deku would shake this off and sleep before the coming exam. He would sit the theory exam, completely flunking it, like solid 15%. Aizawa would have expected this, so he would have already had his name on the list for the extra classes anyway. Deku would then walk up to the practical site with the rest of the class. They would all start bragging, saying they were fighting faux robots, like in the entrance exam. All their hopes are let down as the teachers walk in and explain the scenario. They would all get paired up, Deku in this timeline staying with Bakugo. Everyone's team would get paired up with the teacher, leaving Deku and Bakugo last, as All Might jumps in, landing, looking ultra serious. Deku and Bakugo look at each other and grin widely, before looking back at All Might. Now, I don't think Deku and Bakugo would have talked in this timeline, so this would have been their first time. As they walk away, Deku speaks. So, we're kicking his ass, right? Damn straight, Bakugo would say. They both grin and plot how they're gonna do it, explaining their quirks and super moves. They walk in, Deku having 2 full gauntlets on, as does Bakugo. They both hold onto the bags of blood for ease of access, and they decide to go down swinging. Bakugo and Deku walk through the gates. They stretch a little and then grin at each other. They were about to start running as a huge gust of wind would approach. They hurriedly dip into a nearby alleyway as rubble was flying in their way. Bakugo looks on, not figuring All Might had this amount of power. Deku's grin widens as he looks at Bakugo dead. So, we doing this? Bakugo would shake himself out of it and would blast out onto the road, confronting All Might. Deku would watch us from his side as Bakugo immediately throws his right arm up, sending a point blank huge explosion at All Might. This knocks them both back. They both thud to the floor and look through the cloud of smoke. All Might gets up and grins a little, getting more serious. You'll then hear it. Deku would start laughing before jumping it up from building above him, pulling his cord before dive bombing on a disoriented All Might. Using his two chainsaw arm form, he would drop the chains, contorting before swinging a full 360, hitting All Might right in his weak spot accidentally. All Might would once again go flying. Bakugo would then back him up, sending a second explosion at All Might. The class goes silent. They're straight jumping All Might. No time to move, no time to breathe. Aizawa's impressed. He sees their teamwork, and he sees it as a huge improvement for the both of them. Deku would come from behind All Might and wrap his legs in chain, throwing him into the air. All Might would be sick of this, looking down before sending a gust of wind at them at 80%. They would be thrown back. Deku splattering against the wall and dropping unconscious. Bakugo would shake himself awake and grab his blood bag, pouring it into Deku's mouth and ripping his cord. Deku jolts alive, his eyes rolling back into the front of his head. He'd begin manically laughing again. Bakugo tells Deku to hold off for him for a minute while he rests. That last blow knocked him a little bit. Deku would say happily before jumping off. Stumbling a little before rushing at full speed at All Might, he would use his chainsaws on each of his body part, one on each leg, each foot, each arm, and each head. All had no chains as not to cut All Might accidentally. He would start boxing with All Might, using his chainsaws as a defense and an offense. They would fight a little. He would start boxing with All Might, using his chainsaws as an offense. They would fight for a little before All Might would punch Deku square in the body, sending him against the power pole, completely cooking his back. Deku would fall limp onto the floor, knowing he broke something before he would reach for his blood bag. All Might would walk towards Bakugo, who just got up again. Deku would keep quiet, drinking the blood before grabbing his gauntlet he had saved until now. He would aim one at All Might and pull the pin. All Might gets hit square and gets thrown into a building. This would genuinely piss All Might off. Knowing that his time limit is coming up, he would get up once again, and his grin would fade. He stares on seriously against the two boys. Deku would stare back, bringing the other gauntlet up before pulling the pin. Before he could though, he gets punched into the sky. He coughs up blood and drops the gauntlet. He couldn't even see All Might. This might be bad. Deku falls unconscious in the air, his ribs and back's broken. He would begin to free fall. Bakugo would get punched by All Might and get knocked out. Deku, opening his eyes, would see ground approaching. As a last ditch effort, he yanks his cord and tidily latches a chain onto a pole. He would use this momentum to rocket himself to the gate, grabbing Bakugo on his way to another chain. On his way, with another chain, he would fly towards the gate. All Might would see this and figured Deku would recover anyway. He looks the opposite direction and throws a punch, sending himself flying. His body would connect with Deku as Deku's and Bakugo were thrown into the floor, a huge crater left in their place. Deku lays there. This was the first time he'd been hurt in a while. He gets unconscious, as does Bakugo. All Might would lift the two up and bring them to the infirmary, sitting beside them and getting reprimanded by Recovery Girl for his methods. They would wake up, and Deku would actually hurt a little from this. Walking to class once again, they figured out they had been out for 2 days, and that they would still be participating in the training camp even though they failed. They look at each other with disgust. They failed. The class loads onto the bus, heading off to the training camp. Deku would bring a pillow, sleeping the bus right off. They would stop atop a mountaintop. Deku would be shaken wide by a worried eater before walking outside, rubbing his eyes and yawning. He would see the expression on Aizawa's face, already knowing he's about to lie. Aizawa would tell the class that the bus had broken down and that they had to make their way to the camp manually, pointing to another hill on the horizon. Deku would pull his cord before jumping into the forest below him, running at full speed, saying, "Catch you there, losers!" Aizawa would smirk a little, as would the other teachers, sending the rest of the class with him. Deku genuinely making it to the class quick as shit, like, he's no slob in the speed department. Plus he can run forever, I'm pretty sure. Anyway, they would cook their meals and Deku would completely mess up. He steals some of Bakugo's instead, before wandering off to take a leak, finding Koda. Deku would walk straight up to him, asking what he's doing. Koda would jump a little before telling Deku to get away. Deku would start to fight with Koda, verbally. They would scoff and walk off, sleeping the rest of the night off. He would start his sup classes with Aizawa and Deku would be bored senseless, getting tired as hell. They'd be released and Deku would conk straight out. He would once again enter his mindscape. Deku would wake up to the same dream, looking around and seeing a small orange dog with a chainsaw coming from its head and a cord from its tail. Deku would tilt his head in confusion before looking ahead. Walking towards the door once again, he would get further from him, though not too far. Deku would reach, this time a loud voice bellows in his head. "Don't open the door, Deku." Deku would wake up in a pool of sweat and look at his door of his room, staring into the dark until morning came. Deku walks out of his room looking ratty as hell. Aizawa would have noticed and given Deku a cheeky coffee. They begin to train. Deku would ask Aizawa if he could work on something a little different, meditating instead. Aizawa would be shocked but would agree. Deku would try meditating for the rest of the day. trying to hear the inner voice again. He had no luck though. Night turning to day, he would go through the forest for a spooky activity. Deck would be sent in alone and would notice fire and smoke. He'd be confused and running forward would see Darby and twice talking. He'd think for a second before laughing a little bit and rushing the two of them, pulling his cord and cutting them both in half, not even cutting them both, though not enough to kill them. They would both slam into a tree and fall unconscious before melting to mud. Deku would be confused. The class would have heard the familiar sound of Deku's rev, kind of warning something bad was happening. Aizawa would hear this and immediately lock down, figuring something was up. Deku would keep running on, catching up to Todoroki and Bakugo, who were fighting a moonfish. Skitzes out and rushes Deku immediately. Deku would put his chains on and straight cut through his blades before using an unchained one onto his leg to uppercut him and knock his teeth out. He'd be conked out on the floor and the three of them would continue on, fighting Tokiyami. Deku goes to help but is captured by Mr. Compress. No one notices. Mr. Compress leaves before waving at Bakugo, who turned around just too late. Bakugo would scream, "They got Deku, damn it!" trying to rush Mr. Compress, losing him. They run back to Aizawa and the others to tell them the news. Aizawa freaks out and calls All Might and Nezu immediately. Nezu would be concerned, figuring All for One had something to do with it. Momo would tell them about the device she planted on the Nomu, and they would use it to back engineer the hideout's location. The regular group would go to save Deku, but replacing Deku with Bakugo, like this, they